In lesson 26, we learn about objects. So this is a part of speech, and here we're talking about syntax, how words work together to form sentences. So the object, as we see here, is the noun that a verb's action affects. So the noun that a verb's action affects is the object. The subject is the agent or experiencer of the action. So if we had a sentence such as, I hit the ball, I am the subject because I'm the agent or the one doing the action, and the ball is the object because the ball is the thing that's being affected by the verb's action. It is being hit. So the thing that is being affected by the action of the verb is the object. The one who does the action is the subject. So objects tend to work very similarly in Hebrew as they do in English, but some words in Hebrew require different types of objects than what they require in English. We'll see that in some of our examples. So our authors write, objects in Hebrew may simply be nouns, just like we have in English. I hit the ball. The ball is a noun. But many verbs in Hebrew require preposition to mark the object. They say here you must memorize what a verb takes as its object, simple noun or a preposition plus noun. So some verbs will take a noun as their object, other verbs will require preposition and a noun. And they say that you need to memorize that. Well, you only need to memorize that if you want to speak Hebrew fluently. What you want to do is read biblical Hebrew, then you don't need to memorize it, you just need to know that some verbs require a preposition plus a noun, and other verbs only require a noun. You don't need to know which verb requires which, because you'll see it right on the page. But we will practice this by trying to memorize the more common verbs and which type of object they take. So just for the really common ones, it will become important for us to memorize, or at least to become familiar with which way it normally goes. Well, let's just look at some simple examples here. Genesis chapter 21, Vadonai pakad et Sarah. And the Lord visited Sarah. So here we have our subject, we have our verb, and we have our object. This object happens to be marked by our direct object marker, so we know it's the object. But this is helpful for us to think about objects. So here is our subject. The subject is doing the action. Here's our object. The object is the one who is being affected by the action of the verb. So the Lord is the one visiting, and Sarah is the one being visited. So Sarah is the object. Typically in Hebrew, we have subject, verb, object, word order, but we've learned that the verb can be moved to the front of the sentence. So sometimes we'll have verb, subject, object. Almost all the time, the object will appear after the verb. It can also appear after the subject, but very rarely will the object appear at the beginning of a sentence. In those rare cases, when the object does appear at the beginning of a sentence, it's because the author really wants to emphasize what the object is. So it's a real special object, and we really need to pay attention to it. So the author will break away from the normal word order just to emphasize the object, but that's rather rare. So here we have a simple subject, verb, object, word order. Let's take a look at another example where the verb requires a prepositional phrase. So the verb nagah, to touch, often takes as its object a prepositional phrase. Not always, but often it does. So nagah means to touch, and as we'll see in English, we would not put in a prepositional phrase as an object of the verb to touch. But in Hebrew, the verb to touch, nagah, does need a prepositional phrase most of the time. So let's take a look. This is a rather long example, but it comes from Genesis 3, a familiar story that we've already started to translate in our readings. Umip peri ha'etz asher batok hagan Amar Elohim lo tochlu mimenu velo tig'u bo pen tamutun. So let's translate. And from the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God said, do not eat from it, and do not touch on it, lest you die. So I translated this, do not touch on it, because here we have a preposition, and the O is the object, the fruit. The O here is the suffix here is referring to the fruit, and it is the object of the touching. So you should not touch on it. In English, we would just say you should not touch it. We would leave the preposition off. But in Hebrew, nagah requires a prepositional phrase most of the time. So that bait is necessary in Hebrew, even though we probably wouldn't translate it in English most of the time. So here we have objects in lesson 26. The things you need to remember are the object is the thing that is being acted upon. It is the noun that receives the action. The object normally follows the subject and the verb, but not always. Some verbs require simple noun objects, just a noun, no other preposition. Other verbs require objects that are prepositional phrases, oftentimes with bait or lamed or kaf as a preposition. So we saw nagah here requiring a prepositional phrase as its object. We'll become more familiar with this as we read more Hebrew, so it's not something that we necessarily need to memorize, although the more we're aware of those nouns that require simple objects and those that require prepositional phrases as objects, the better we will be at translating. So lesson 26 is objects.